Hi, and welcome to Season 2 of the Team Deakins Podcast, a collection of informal conversations between Roger and James Deakins and a guest. We never know where the conversation will take us, so listen in and see where it goes. This episode is sponsored by Aperture, a premier manufacturer of LED lighting with the industry's greatest variety of fixtures for your complete lighting needs. Aperture recently announced the new Storm family of lights. With LED white light quality that matches natural daylight and classic tungsten bulbs, plus extreme low-end dimming while maintaining color quality. Discover more about the new Storm lights and the complete Aperture lighting ecosystem at aperture.com. Today we're having another look at post, this time focusing on the deliverables, the other formats that are made of the movie, other than the theatrical release, and the struggle to maintain the original look throughout. Joining us for this conversation is the cinematographer Steve Yedlin. You know him from his many credits, including Looper, Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi, Knives Out, and Glass Onion, to name a few. He's also a wizard at the technical side of things, having put together demonstrations that include a look at the truth and myths behind resolution, and most recently, an extensive look at HDR. Steve, we're happy to have you with us to tackle this issue.
Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here with you guys.
You know, you wrote us at one point when we were talking about how important it was to monitor deliverables, and you made a allusion to, thank you, the word was analogy that I wanted, to a book. Do you remember saying that? Can you say that again?
I don't remember. Which one?
No, you said when you reproduce a book, if all the words are the same, it's the same book, even if you change the typeface or the print size or the pagination of the paper type, or if the book is faded and falling apart, it's also unambiguous. But with cinema, you have ambiguity and pitfalls everywhere. So just tell us from that, what are the pitfalls with cinema? You know, I mean, when I started, I'm sure maybe when you started out, though I'm older than you, it was just film, you know, and you got your cut negative and you made an answer print and you sat there with a timer and discussed what worked and what didn't work, and you could alter the density and you could alter the color in the sense that you could alter overall RGB, red, green, and blue. But that was it. But, you know, basically, unless you did some clever process like Ozzie Morris did for Moby Dick or something, and you used, you know, overlays and whatever. But it was a very straightforward process. There were no other deliverables. So tell us about the changes, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, I think I had forgotten about that quote, but yeah, I think
that was a good one.
Good quote.
Yeah, well, I think I mean, the very basic part of that is that there is the whatever the record is needs to be interpreted, and that was the case even with film, because if you look at a strand of negative, it doesn't look right. It's flat, it's backwards, it's orange. It doesn't look like the movie. So, you know, even then you needed an interpretation. But because that was, so even there were some pitfalls, you know, a minor version of the pitfall problem, because, you know, what if you had looked at it on one print stock and now it's on another print stock? Or, you know, what if somebody lost the sheet of paper that's all the timing cues that go with the cut neg? Or, those are all pretty minor things, because even the print stocks that were most different from each other still followed a whole bunch of general rules. You know, on the contact printer, if you expose it so that a certain patch comes out gray, basically the things as they get brighter than gray or darker than gray are going to fall off at least roughly the same on the different print stocks, even if it's not perfect. But that variation is kind of a micro version of what we got now, because the more control you have, that means the more variables there are. So like the more variables that are possible to control, the more variables you need to control. And, you know, and just at the very basis of that is that there isn't just one, in that analogy, there isn't just one way that print stocks are. So, when we archive a movie, or like when you make the DSM or the DCD on the kind of top level masters that they're going to make other things from, that's a digital file that's got, a series of pixels in it that are 3 numbers, red, green, and blue. Even if you do everything right and you did it as simply as possible, you don't, proliferate the complexities as some people do. Some people are using different LUTs or color grade. Part of their color grade's over the LUT and part of it's under the LUT. And, even if you simplify the most you can do, it's still the case that, you're recording these 3 numbers, and you at least have to know what color space that's in. And even just the very fact that we have different color spaces, and, it's easy to write on the, both physically on the actual physical hard drive or whatever it is, and then also in the file names and in the notes and everything, it can say what color space it is, but that doesn't mean somebody can't mess up. I know an example of, even with that, with these, sometimes, especially with HDR, so-called HDR as opposed to SDR, a lot of times the deliverables are done in sort of hybrid color spaces where they're not using one of the standardized ones that's in a document. They're using the primaries from this one and the transfer function from that one. And that's fine as long as everybody knows what they're doing. But I know of like an actual situation where, one post house used a hybrid color space and they documented it very well. And a different post house was doing the final finishing to broadcast this TV show, or probably not broadcast, but stream. And they used they just basically didn't pay attention to this hybrid color space. They treated it as though it was one of the standard ones that was sort of similar to it. And everything was completely oversaturated because they were using different primaries,
So I think that we should do a definition of color space and explain what color space is.
Explain how you can possibly have a different color space. Because again, going back to the original film process, there was red, green, and blue, and you had a printer that was calibrated to a certain standard, and each lab followed a certain standard. You didn't have those kind of variables. So can you talk about what is, in a digital world, what is a color space?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and by the way, my HDR demo that's nominally about HDR kind of almost secretly is a color space demo more than an HDR demo in a way. Talking about what how we can understand, kind of shift our mental model to align with reality a little bit more to avoid some of these pitfalls. And I'm glad you asked that right then, because that dovetails exactly with what I was saying, which is, what's in these files is just 3 numbers, right? Like in the computer, red, green, and blue are numbers; they're not colors. And the color space is what correlates the numbers to a physical light intensity and color on the screen. And the analogy that I make in the HDR demo is it's like meters and feet. They both measure the same thing. And you can take something that's written down as a number and convert it into a real physical thing. So in that sense, it's a color space quite literally is a unit of measure, and in that example, they did it wrong. They basically, somebody had written, the blueprints in feet, and then they built the thing in meters.
It's like Stonehenge and
and Spinal Tap,
and Spinal Tap, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, Spinal Tap has lots of great analogies, because also these go to 11 is also pretty perfect in more ways than one right now, both in terms of people wanting things amped up and in terms of people not understanding that if you use a different scale, that doesn't mean something's bigger or smaller or louder or softer. It's just a different unit of measure. I guess the lesson here is Spinal Tap has all kind of wisdom in it. So.
But basically, when we're working in digital, we're introducing different color spaces, right? Depending on what you choose to work in.
Yeah, and it honestly shouldn't matter at all, because, to take the analogy farther, obviously you can do anything in meters and anything in feet. And if you do, And, if the analogy that I make in the demo is, if the architect draws up the plans in feet and the builder only has tape measures in meters, that doesn't mean you make it a different size. You have to do the conversion, you have to do it correctly. And if you don't do the conversion correctly, that's still not an attribute of meters versus feet. It's an attribute of not knowing what you're doing. If you go, look how much bigger it comes out with meters, so meters are better. That's not, that's just, you did it wrong. So with the exception of a few edge cases, you can convert perfectly between color spaces. So for the most part, a lot of things that people attribute to color spaces, like, this has, richer colors, all kinds of things, is actually not an attribute of the different color space. It's just an attribute of doing it wrong. You could have had the richer colors in the other color space, but you just converted it wrong and you just distorted everything and made it different. So, so some of these pitfalls are that it is difficult. There are more variables, and, there's things to get right, not just color space, but all kinds of, pipeline, color pipeline management stuff. I mean, there's all kinds of things, video range, full range, and, the LUTs have to be the LUT 2 has to be the correct video range versus full range, and it's got to be formatted for the color space that you're going to, and the monitor has to be in the right colors. So there's all these, it's kind of, there's the kind of difficult to do it right even when you're trying. And then you add on top of that there's sort of a political, and it's not even a technical thing, it's a political thing where people just want it to be different, like specifically with HDR. Well, I mean, we had this with 4K also, but specifically with HDR, where people want it to look different. So then they make it different, and then they say, see, HDR is different. You're like, no, you made it look different, whether it's because you did it wrong and you don't understand, or whether you did it on purpose to try to, upsell people to get them to buy 2 discs of the same movie instead of 1, but either way, because basically everything that's within, again, there's edge cases, but, basically everything that's within the normal scope of how things look is perfectly convertible between color spaces. So if you have a movie that's being shown in one color space and everything about it, not just edge cases here and there, like, highlights or the most saturated, neon sign in the movie, if like just every single thing looks different, that's literally either somebody did something wrong or they're intentionally just making it look different, and it's not an attribute. It's not an attribute of the color space, even if they're saying it is. It's just an attribute of doing it, 2 different ways.
Well, going through what post used to be, we had the prints, and then we introduced VHS, which was a whole problem, because first of all, they're watching it at home, and what's it really going to look like? Right.
Yeah.
So that was the first.
Yeah, the variations of the television set they're watching it on, and that would even happen if you went in a timing suite and you were timing for the VHS release. I remember being in a studio in New York, looking at 3 different monitors, and each one was totally different. One was too green, one was too magenta, and the other one was too desaturated. I mean, it was, and the timer would say, well, which one do you want? I mean,
which looks better to you?
So do you really have to make a different variant for every TV set in existence,
But then the people have to watch that variant for the TV set.
Yeah, right.
So that never worked.
More variables.
And that brings up yet another one of these big pitfalls, which is that we already have the problem. TV manufacturers and TV salespeople like Best Buy and these places, they actively want everything to be amped up. They want it to look different. They're like, see how much more vibrant this one is. And you're like, but the best the thing can do is show it correctly, not crank it beyond what it's supposed to be. But they need, like, literally, if you made the movie just look actually correct and you put it in a sea of those TVs on a sales floor, it's going to look dull and dingy because they've got everything cranked to the absolute max. And again, because the whole thing of a color space is it's supposed to communicate exactly what color and intensity something's supposed to be. So they start with something that's maybe sort of right, and then they crank the heck out of it. And the thing is, we already have that problem before we introduced the new problem. Instead of fixing that, we just added more problems, which is, because there should at least be the option. Like, I understand if people want their stuff cranked and they don't want to see it, they don't see it as artistry. And also, there's people that, that watch TV all the time and are not looking at anything remotely like cinema. I mean, you watch football and they want it cranked, and there isn't anybody that sat there and color graded the football game to make it exactly every bit of its tonality and color. And if somebody wants the jerseys to be bright, that's fine. But there isn't even an option to say, hey, when I push this button,
do it as the
just follow
the original was intended.
Like we know it's a consumer device and not a professional one, but just do the best you can to follow the color space specification. And we don't have that. Not even filmmaker mode right now at least does that, which is kind of meant to do that, but it doesn't do that.
Oh, really?
No,
really?
It doesn't.
You do wonder if those. Wonder if those sports fans, when they actually go to a game and watch it live, they're disappointed because it's all the colors are less saturated. It's rather like the people buying a Mediterranean holiday off the adverts on television, and they go to the Med and the blue's not that blue.
So
the sand's not that bright and yellow.
So there's televisions that have filmmaker modes. I've never seen that. All I see is
so there's
all the other choices, and nothing ever looks right.
There's an initiative called filmmaker mode, which is a good thing. I'm not at all knocking it, and it's like one button and it turns off motion smoothing and noise reduction.
Thank you.
Kind of all of these over processed things. But one thing that it doesn't do, at least not yet, I've kind of been advocating for them to add this, but it does not, it sort of in no way enforces the color space to be followed correctly. It has some sort of, and then we're getting into stuff that I admittedly don't know the details of right now. I think there's some rule that supposedly kind of like turns off vivid or whatever. But the thing is, there's not, that's what you turn off, not what you turn on. That's not saying how you do follow the color space specifications. It's saying, however you're following it wrong, don't also cake this other problem on top of it.
Right.
So, but my whole point here was this: the crazy thing is that this wasn't even the crux of what I was saying. I was saying we already have all these problems where you don't know. Firstly, some TVs are just not very good, like they're really milky or whatever. You've got these problems with them being cranked, but now we've added these new problems that confuse everybody. Like even professionals that have stuff set up in their homes can't figure out how to get the image to look right because with HDR, it's nominally, like when you master it and the way it works and everything, it's nominally absolute tonality, like the luminance levels, as opposed to relative. Because SDR has, or so-called SDR, I think this distinction between SDR and HDR is silly and confusing people. But, so-called SDR, all the digital cinema stuff, has been exactly like non-digital stuff in that both film itself and also things that are reflective, like if you have a printed, a photo printed on photo paper, if you have a painting from before photography, all of these things are relative. Like however much light you shine on the painting, it's going to reflect a percentage of it. And if you take it outside in the bright light, it's going to look like the same painting as when you look at it under an incandescent light that could be 1,000 times dimmer, because your eye adjusts to the surroundings, and then that looks right in that environment. And in fact, if it didn't change, it would look wrong. Right. Like if I have a painting and it looks luminous under this 100-watt light bulb, and then I take it outside in the sunlight and it's still only reflecting the same amount of light, it would look like it's almost black, because why is it reflecting?
Right.
And here it was reflecting, 20% of the light, and out there it's reflecting, 1/10 of 1% of the light. Like that doesn't make, well, how did it become this black hole object all of a sudden? And, same thing with film, where, however much light you send through it, it's gonna block, the dyes are always gonna block the same percentage of light, so you get the same.
Except for when the first problems with film way before digital was film projection, and the fact that projectors were often a different set at a different value, and or the bulb would age, so that the screen's brightness was never at the optimal level, and then you did feel the image was getting muddy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Isn't there a certain level your eye can't adjust to that screen being too dark?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I'm talking within, obviously there's an amount of brightness where we can't see anymore. It's too dim and we can't see. And there's a level of brightness that will injure us or at least be uncomfortable.
Right.
But within the range where our vision does work, and also when it gets really dim, before you can't see at all, you start to not see color because of the three kinds of receptors in our eye. Only the green one can see in dim light, so you don't have any color differentiation when it's really dim. But once you get over that hump, so between getting over that hump and getting to the point where it's so bright that it's injuring you because your eye can't, close down enough, like within that range, we can pretty much adjust to it. So that's why if something's like, like if the projector's a little bit dim, that's fine, like you're going to adjust to it. But that's also why some of these, like sometimes the 3D movies look really dim, is because that you can't overcome it. Because even if they put a gain screen, even if they get the projector as bright as it can and they got a gain screen on, the bottom line is that they have a polarizer on the projector and a polarizer on your eye. So you're cutting out, you're not just cutting out a little bit of light. I mean, it's like, 6 stops or something like that. And, by the time it gets to your eye, it could be, instead of 14-foot Lamberts, it could be 3-foot Lamberts or something like that. So that is getting way too dim. But within the range where things work, within the range where our eye works well, it all kind of looks the same. And again, in fact, it has to change. Like in a movie theater, when they do a fade to white, it can actually hurt your eyes, especially if you go from a dark scene and then there's a fade to white, even though that's only 48 nits, 14-foot Lamberts is 48 nits, which is lower than people think SDR is limited. SDR is actually not limited to any nit level, but the misconception is that it's 100 nits. That's half of that, and it hurts because it's really big in your field of view, and it's completely black. It's not just like when we're in a monitor grading environment, not a projector one. It's supposed to be lights off, but like a tiny glow on the, like behind the monitor or whatever. But this is completely dark, so you actually need it to be dim to an extent, not 3-foot Lamberts. But that's why we have the 14, is because it can look bright, but it doesn't hurt in a dark theater when it fills your field of view and you don't get eye fatigue. But then if you're in a bright room, like let's say you're in a room that's got the windows open to daylight and you watch a movie, if it's only 14-foot Lamberts, it's going to look really dim. You actually need it to be brighter. So I guess the thing I was saying is that, our eye does adapt to these different brightnesses. And like I said, in fact, you need to be able to adapt it for things to look right. But now we have this system that at least nominally is absolute. So it used to be that, with painting, photography, cinema, everything, the image author, whoever that is, photographer, painter, cinematographer, you're creating these fixed ratios, the relative contrast, how much brighter is this area of the frame than that area. And then the exhibitor or the viewer gets to see that in different situations. Like if it's a painting, you can see it, inside under an electric light at night, or you can see it outside in the daylight and you know what it looks like. And if it's cinema, you can go into a darkened movie theater and see it at 14-foot Lamberts. And, for it to, you not just can, but have to make it brighter if you're not in a situation that's that dark. You want it to be more like 150 or something like that. If you're in even a normal lit room, it doesn't even have to be bright with sun streaming. And even a normally lit room, the 14-foot Lamberts is going to look dim. I mean, lights are off in the cinema. So it's always been like that with, all the analog stuff, but then even with digital, it's always been like that. Except then they introduced this HDR thing that's nominally absolute. But then there's all of these other things going on, like, okay, people can change the brightness of their TV, but what does that mean if it's absolute instead of relative? And then you've got, things, and then you're trying to convert between SDR and HDR, but you're converting between relative and absolute. So people get confused about how to do it right. I'm not saying you can't do it right.
Well, just to explain that though, relative and absolute. What are you talking about there?
So those RGB numbers that are in, like I was saying, the color space is literally a unit of measure. It's telling you how how much luminance and what exact chromaticity is supposed to be coming out of the monitor or projector. It's the correlation between those three numbers in the image file, or that are, going over the video signal, because they're just numbers, not colors and, not color and light. It's that relationship between the color space is the relationship between the numbers and the exact luminance and chroma coming out of the monitor and projector. Again, it's literally like meters and feet. That's a unit that helps you translate the number into a physical thing. So, on the scale of 0 to 1, like in the computer, it's basically a 0 to 1 scale, but you can think of it as 0 to 100% or whatever. On that scale of 0 to 1, in all of the traditional, it's funny now that traditional is SDR, not just film, but
that's funny. Right.
But the way that digital has always been is exactly like film is, where film blocks out a percentage of whatever light you put through it. So that's why you can see it on a light table instead of in the cinema, or, on a moviola or a flatbed, and this is the same thing where that number, so you have those three numbers, red, green, and blue, as it goes from 0 to 1 or from 0 to 100%, you're saying what percentage of whatever this is calibrated to am I showing? There's actually a transfer function for that. It's not linear, but once you put it through the transfer function, you're saying what percentage. So, for example, a lot of times we put with SDR anyway, we think of middle gray as being in the middle. It's 0.5 in the code values, but there's a 2.4 transfer function on it. So when you raise 0.5 to the power of 2.4, you get 0.19. So you're saying middle gray is at 19%, which is really close to the 18% that we talk about or whatever. But there's a few, I'm getting in the weeds a little bit, because there's different places that, like, where something that was middle gray on set doesn't necessarily mean it's going to come out, that you would even want it to come out middle in the image. But my point here is that if you have a 2.4 transfer function, when you have 0.5 in, you're going to get 19% out. That means 19% of whatever the projector or monitor is calibrated to. So it can be anything. So in the movie theater, that's going to be 19% of 14 foot Lamberts or 48 nits. And then on my screen that I've got at 150 nits, it's going to be 19% of that. So everything maintains the same relative, how much brighter everything is in the screen relative to everything else in the screen stays the same if you properly follow the color space. Obviously, we're talking about all those TVs that are cranked like crazy at Best Buy. I don't follow it, but if you do follow the color space specification, you have any calibrated thing, it can be any brightness. So you could even have the monitor as bright as it'll go. Like if you're trying to look at a monitor like outside in daylight, you can set it as bright as it'll go. So that transfer function, like in the example I gave, a 2.41, but that transfer function says, okay, I'm going to, for whatever the incoming number is for red, for green, for blue, there's 3 of them per pixel, how far of the way from minimum to maximum am I? Just what percentage of the way? But with HDR, the only implemented one that's, actually goes to people. There's some other things that are even called HDR, which I don't know why, because then there isn't even any difference between SDR and HDR. But the only one that's actually being used has nominal absolute values on the y-axis of that transfer function. Or it depends on if it's encode or decode. But if it's so for whatever code value you have, it's saying that you send it through that transfer function, and it's not saying it's a percentage of the way from black to white. It's saying it's an exact number. So it's saying this pixel is always supposed to be 100 nits. So you can see why now it becomes crazy. Like, how do we actually keep track of all this stuff? Like, if the scale goes up to 10,000, which nobody's monitor can even do that. But even if you start going into the couple thousands, you would never want to, most TVs can't even do it, but you wouldn't want to make it where you're just brightening the whole image to where the whole image is 10 times brighter than what we're saying is sort of comfortable in a dark room. Because even if you were ever outside, if you were in a situation where, like, you're staring into the sun or staring into a 20K and also trying to watch a movie. I mean, that doesn't even make any sense, So like even when you're outside, if you're not being blasted, you would never use that. And, even most HDR people that are big HDR proponents agree with this. This isn't like a controversial thing. It's just that people get confused. So you're not really using it for overall brightness. You're using it to have these dazzling highlights. So you're allowed, if you want to, because with SDR, basically, I mean, these numbers are a little bit variable depending on how you define it, but I'm just talking magnitude wise. You're not going to have anything brighter than 10 times brighter than kind of what feels like neutral. Like sort of not middle gray in the monitor system, but like what was middle gray on set, what was exposed for. Nothing's going to be more than 10 times brighter. So you can have things, we do artful tonal rendering. We don't do literal clinical tonal rendering. So you can have things that on set were much more than 10 times brighter than middle gray, and they're not blown out. You can still see them, but on the monitor, they're not more than 10 times middle gray, which is also part of what makes it so gentle and beautiful. But HDR allows, if you want these dazzling highlights, it's a style. Like some people want it. I don't personally prefer it for my movies, but I know some people want it. So now if they want, you're not making everything brighter. What you're saying is, okay, I can go, instead of the brightest thing being 10 times brighter than middle gray, it can be 50 times brighter than middle gray. So you can have these little, areas of dazzling sparkle. But you can see how this can cause all kinds of confusion, because the whole image is supposedly, in order to do this, in order to get that advantage, they're doing it a way where the whole image is supposedly absolute instead of relative. But how do you even deal with that? Like, how do you convert between HDR and SDR? And how do you, like I have my way that I do it that I think that works fine, but I'm just saying people get confused about it. They'll look at the whole outer range and say, well, we have to fit this whole range into this range, so we have to do all of this crazy stuff to the image. And the thing is, you don't. You could do it. You could do it where all of that relative contrast that makes a thing recognizably itself. You could do it where it all stays the same, and then just those edge cases where this one system can describe these edge cases and the other one can't. You could just delicately handle those areas. And, in the HDR demo, I bring up the example of your fantastic work on Serious Man, which is one of my favorite movies ever, and just so beautiful. And all of your amazing work, as since things have been mastered digitally, where you actually can control it, has these just beautiful, beautiful highlights. And they're not even the 10 times middle gray. They're
right.
6 to 8 times. And that doesn't mean it looks dark, because middle gray isn't darker. It means, and it also doesn't mean we're chopping any tones off. It means all those tones are just delicately handled. That's what it's always been called the shoulder of the curve, where you gently lay all those highlights over. And that's a great example of how, because kind of we're saying the whole topic here is, authorship through the post, through the whole system. Is, the filmmaker should be able to decide that, because it's never literal, it's never clinical. Like sometimes people, I've heard people say where they think the highlights need to be chopped off because this is 20 times brighter, but when this was photographed, it was 20 times brighter, but the monitor can only go 10 times brighter than middle gray. You're like, no, that doesn't mean it has to get chopped off, because not only do you not have to do, not only is it not required that you do a linear representation like that, literally never happens. Not even on like a electronic looking broadcast video rendering, let alone a beautiful, artful cinematic one. It just never happens that it's literal like that. That we're always making those highlights gentle. We're taking everything the camera got and gently, showing them. And the proof to it is, or example anyway, is also in your movies, where the fact that the brightest white is only 6 or 8 times brighter than middle gray instead of 10 times doesn't mean anything's chopped. It's the opposite. You see all the variation, all the tonality in the whites, and it just looks really gentle and beautiful. And it doesn't mean the audience can't tell that it's white in the movie, because it's rolling into that beautiful whiteness.
Well, and I think one of the problems is with all these different formats is they think that you time it for the theatrical DI, and then they'll just add trims and just speed it through the system, while we always fight to be able to sit there, because a trim can get it to a point, but not an overall never seems to work.
I always kind of like feel it's like, I mean, because I grew up just watching movies on a movie screen, really. I mean, I'd watch movies on TV, but the TV was then black and white.
So
and
in my
and it was really, you weren't really judging the image. You were watching Anna Glad or some film noir, and it was fine. But when you go to the cinema, I mean, basically, the contrast and the brightness was restricted because projectors were never that bright, and it was a white screen. And as soon as you had, television, and then you have digital, you're kind of watching a kind of very different format, aren't you? Watching a what am I saying? Watching a high definition television, you're actually looking at a light source. Yeah. Whereas in a cinema, you're watching light bounce off a screen. It's a very different
absolutely
viewing system, isn't it?
Especially when people are using it for that, because if you were to set a backlit screen to 14-foot lamberts and look at it in a dark room, even though the technology is different, it's not going to feel like it's coming at you like that. But the thing is, nobody does that, Nobody's got a TV at 14-foot lamberts. They don't even have it at the 100-foot lamberts that people think SDR is limited. The reason I keep saying that is because I hear a lot out there where people think SDR, quote, can only do 100 nits and HDR is brighter, which is, I say this in the demo, that's absolutely false. SDR is the color space SDR. The SDR color spaces are just percentages. What percentage of the way are you from black to white? So it can be any brightness. The 100 nit thing does exist, but it's a recommendation for a darkened color grading environment. So that's not, that's specifically for that. So it's for a room that's dark and calibrated, and also where it's a monitor, not a projector, so it's small in your field of view. If it was huge in your field of view, you'd actually want it dimmer, not brighter. Right. And because it's small and it's dark, it's 100.
Right.
But nobody's going to do that. Like I wouldn't. My TV at home, I have it at 150 because I almost never watch it completely dark. Even if I turn the lights out, there's something on. And then sometimes I'm even watching it in the daytime with the windows, where even if they're closed, there's still like light coming through them. So it can be any level, but I think you're absolutely right but what people are doing both in grading styles, but then also what people are doing at home is they are blasting themselves out with it. Like these go to 11 thing of if the thing can do it, people are going to use it, and then they're getting and then they're getting barraged with it. I do think that leaving out this confusion with HDR for a sec, but actually even in a sense even including it. There's one thing, even though we sort of have a much bigger mess than we've ever had, there actually is one thing that's better, which is that these things are, if you do it right, they actually are convertible. Like in your example, like the idea that you would have a print system and then you're going to do a hanging negative telecine and just trim it is crazy. Because it's it's completely different. It's going through a machine that's not like now, like with film scanners, you can, people don't usually do it, but you can get it much more fixed and repeatable, and where it has a fixed relationship to the film's density. But the hanging telecine machines never did that. So you've got to adjust it. You can't not adjusting it doesn't mean leaving it the same. You have to adjust it for it to be the same. So the one thing that actually is better now is if you do it right, you actually can convert between color spaces again perfectly. If you master in a color space, that's wider gamut, or that can do more than the 10 times middle gray brightness, then you're going to have more pixels that are edge cases. More pixels in your movie that are edge cases that are not perfectly convertible. Doesn't mean they need to be chopped and clipped or messed up, but they just won't be exactly the same. But other than those pixels, everything is perfectly convertible. And quite literally, all of my movies and also all of your movies, we're not doing that because we're not going more than 10 times middle gray, and we're not making, like even when you have a vibrant red, it's not an electronic, obnoxious version of it. It's an artful version of it. And, so all of those colors and tones are perfectly convertible. So, there's a sense where people want these things to look different, or they might send it through an automated conversion that makes it look different. Here's your movie in HDR, here's your movie in HDR, and here's your movie in SDR. You're like, well, no, here's my movie with the grade I did, and here's the movie with the automated thing that changed my color grade. That's not, that's not a format.
I mean, we have found, though, even when they've done trims, we've still needed to adjust, because it would depend if you had a scene that 2/3 of it was sky and so a lot of highlights, but then you'd have another scene where that wasn't true. So maybe it was the trim or whatever, but while it basically looked good, to get it right, we had to get in there and play.
Sure. And
shot by shot.
And what instance is that? Are you talking about from one digital color space to another, or are you talking about from film to for instance, from DI to HDR?
Yeah.
Oh, well, yes. Oh, no, but that's because of the thing that I'm talking about, where the way that they're converting to HDR is great. The thing is, you can convert from. I mean, and it's actually so frustrating that this is happening to you, because the thing is, you can convert where it looks the same, or like literally the two just literally look the same. Like if you put the two monitors next to each other, because
we've made it look the same in the end, yeah.
Right, but what I'm saying is you shouldn't have to do that. But that is one of the things that is happening. I have to do that on my movies too, but it's not inherent. It's because of all this stuff that's going on, where they're like, well, you have to, they're saying you have, like, I mean, I'm finishing a movie right now where they're saying you have to do one deliverable because this is the studio rule, and then we're going to make automated HDR and SDR from the one.
Yeah.
If I'm allowed to make them, I can convert perfectly, but with the automated one, it's changing it. So you're allowed to do trim. So you're allowed to do the trims, but you're not allowed to convert it yourself. You have to use their kind of screwy conversion. If I had converted it myself, it would just literally look exactly the same. Which is what I was showing you guys when you're at the demo. Like those two monitors that were next to each other, they just literally look exactly the same. And also they were the same model of monitor. One's getting HDR signal, one's getting SDR, and they're physically doing the same thing also. What's different is the processing, right? I'm sending the one in meters and the one in feet, and the one is set up for meters and the other is set up for feet. So the kind of the calculations in the thing, it has to do something slightly different. And then it decodes it into light on the screen, and then they're doing exactly the same thing. And of course, you don't need to do any trims because mathematically it's convertible. And, you and I, some people do, but you and I don't have any colors that aren't convertible. And even if you do, it's going to be some pixels here and there and super obnoxiously garish things like laser, car brake, red car brake lights, lasers, neon signs. It's not going to be skin tone, no matter how vibrant you make a skin tone, it's never going to be outside of the gamut where it can't be converted, and it has to be, so yeah. I mean, that's what's doubly frustrating about it, is you're absolutely right that you have to do those trims, but we shouldn't have to, because it is convertible. We put all of this, we put all of this love and effort into making it exactly how you want, and then they go, here's we just took a sledgehammer to it, and now we're going to let you do these. Go ahead.
But at the same time, I mean, we've been in a situation where we've had the studio exec come in the room when we're doing HDR and say, no, it should definitely look brighter when it was a dark film or something, because it's a new revenue stream. And if they're going to release it as HDR, people don't want to buy the same movie. They want to buy a different movie.
But you told a story about a consumer who was disappointed because there was no difference between the SDR and the HDR version. So hasn't the viewer, the consumer, now been kind of manipulated to expect different versions of the same movie? As though the HDR is bigger and better. It's
right. The thing that's really frustrating about that is that's almost comically frustrating is obviously that's not true, right? Like they don't have to look different. Whichever one of the two you like better,
right.
You can make the other one look like it. They're literally making them different. Exactly what you said, just to sell. I mean, when I say they, it depends on who you're talking about. But there's certainly a camp who just wants there to be two versions that are different. But the irony is, by doing it this disingenuous way, you actually shackle what the two different ones even are. Like think about, there's that movie Logan that they released a black and white and a color version of. That was the filmmakers doing something that they wanted to do. They're not pretending it's in a different format, right? Like the two discs are the same. They're in the same color space. They're the same technology. They're like, we did it two different ways, and it's not because they're not even. The thing is, it's not really the format that makes it look different. By and large, I mean, again, there's like pixels here and there that are outliers, but overall, it's not the format that makes it look different. It's the political situation you just said, where people just want the two things to be different. But if they actually admitted that we want two versions of the movie, not we want it in two formats, then you could actually do whatever you wanted with the two versions instead of being forced into the one thing that they're telling people is a format, but it's really just a grading style that they always do whenever it's in that form.
That could be kind of fun, actually, to make, have that choice of, let's just change it all now.
Yeah.
But it is quite depressing when you see, for instance, a DVD of a movie that you've worked on, but it wasn't a movie that you were called in to remaster, and it's horrible. It's nothing close to what you originally, but it's also not even... the same thing, but bigger and brighter. It's just badly timed.
I think it's kind of sad. I mean, when digital first came along, I thought it was fantastic. I mean, I used to shoot a lot of Super 35, and if you were just doing a film finish, right, that meant you had to do a
optical
interneg.
Yeah, an optical blow up for the widescreen release. But as soon as you were able to scan it, you could use the full resolution of the negative. And then for any film, it bypassed the need for an internegative. You could do one scan of the original camera negative, and everything, theoretically, if you're film master and all the digital deliverables, will be that same camera negative resolution. I mean, I kind of think the sad thing is, though, now it became so powerful, and there's so many more people involved. And now I wonder, I mean, it's wonderful that most of the time we see a release of a film that we've worked on, we get asked to do the timing if it's a re-release format or whatever. But what happens on sort of classic movies when, the director and the cinematographer are long dead? There was one film, it was one of my favorite films, that was retimed by the cinematographer. The director had died. And it looks wonderful, but I don't think it really reflects what the director had asked for. It's more what the cinematographer had felt at the time. I mean, it's very lovely, but I kind of worry. But then when neither the cinematographer or the director is around, what are they doing? Are they doing kind of like, classic black and white films in HDR? Have you ever seen Lawrence of Arabia in HDR? I'm not sure.
Well, luckily, I do think that, it depends on who the they is in that sentence, but I do think
they. Who are they?
I do actually think that in some ways, a lot of that tends, I'm by no means saying across the board, but I think there's a tendency for that stuff to actually be better than the new stuff because of the thing where it really is just restoration work, and they're not trying to make a flashy new movie. I recently looked at the HDR version of the original theatrical cut of Amadeus, because it was for many years the only version you could get was the director's cut, and they re-released the actual movie that was in theaters finally, and and it's actually weirdly that you can only get HDR. There isn't a SDR version, and I looked at it, and I'd actually recently seen a print of it, and it looks pretty good. I mean, I'm not saying it's absolutely perfect, but it looks pretty good. And, also like Criterion is doing, Criterion Collection, which is absolutely fantastic. And all of whenever they restore an old movie, it's absolutely beautiful. And, they're doing HDR discs. And as far as I can tell, they're doing it right and not trying to goose it up or anything, I mean, like even their version of Citizen Kane, you can't buy them separate. You get the SDR and the HDR because it's whenever they say 4K, because the 4K discs, like the spec for the 4K disc is its HDR. Like there isn't even an SDR 4K disc. So when they say it's 4K, it's also, nominal HDR.
Right. Is one different from the other if you're watching it on a standard size TV?
The Citizen Kane, you mean?
Yeah. Is it noticeably different, the two versions?
I have to be honest, I haven't looked at the HDR version. Because I have to watch it on somebody else's because I don't actually have an HDR disc player. So I just put the SDR one in and it looks magnificent. But I mean, separate from the whole HDR, SDR thing, I mean, they're doing incredible work because like you're talking about, what happens when these, movies, when the people aren't around anymore. And one thing that always, and also speaking of Orson Welles, I love his version of The Trial. And for years, there didn't exist any good version of it, because, firstly, nobody's really even playing it in repertory theaters. You can't go see it in the cinema. And there were these different horrendous DVDs of it because what happened was it had fallen into, my understanding is it had fallen into public domain. So because nobody could own it or stop anybody else from having a version, nobody wanted to restore it properly. So there were these horrendous, like the DVD was made from a standard def, like interlaced thing from before they even had, forget HD discs. They didn't even have the 16:9 enhanced discs back then, It was just such a screwed up version. And I'd been waiting for this for years. And finally Criterion released The Trial and they just did absolutely beautiful restoration on it. And I've never seen a print of it. I don't know if prints even still exist, but it looks absolutely magnificent. And it looks like what a black and white print looks like. I can't say for sure what that print looked like, but it looks like a black and white, like what a black and white print would be. And they just
I remember seeing it on film, but for people that don't know it, I think it's Orson Welles' best film myself. I love it. But,
such a great movie.
Yeah, it's brilliant. So they kind of, it's funny in a kind of way there seems those people have more respect for classic films than they do for contemporary ones. But maybe it's just the sort of market. Maybe in the future, all those films will be, our films will be more respected for our contribution.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. It's strange, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, another thing that's happening, that I'm seeing with legacy titles, that's sort of a good thing and sort of a bad thing at the same time, which is because, now there's sort of there's different sort of like machine learning, sort of like the tools that can like up-res, clean it up, do stuff to it. And it absolutely does not look perfect at all. Like, I mean, it doesn't look the same as actually restoring it. So of course that's a bummer, but the flip side is, it's actually at least possible to watch some old movies that wouldn't even be available, because nobody is going to pay to restore it. So there are actually a lot of titles.
That's true.
There's a lot of titles now where, somebody did a not very good transfer, like these ones of the Trial, like in, not, like standard def days, like it was, transferred to, Betacam or something, and it's like interlaced and everything else. And, they can, and not only is that bad in itself, but if you play that directly on a contemporary screen, it's going to look even worse. Like when we watched interlaced stuff on an interlaced monitor, you sort of couldn't see it. But if you put something interlaced on a progressive refresh monitor, it looks disastrous. The fact that, that these movies, like it's sort of, because I've watched, like I can always tell, you can tell that that's what happened when you see these titles, but it's kind of cool because on the one hand, you're like, I wish this was a real restoration instead of just sending it through the upres meat grinder. But I wouldn't have even got to see the movie otherwise, because nobody is going to restore that movie.
Right.
You know, it's because it's not Citizen Kane. It's a much rarer movie. There isn't a market for it. They're never going to make back the money it cost to upres it. I mean, to remaster it. So they send it through that thing. And so that's one of those, like, it's good and it's bad. Like, it's bad because it's not a real restoration, but it's good because you at least get to see the movie.
Yeah, but there's a danger that you accept something then it's not the original filmmaker's intent, and it's a sort of AI's version of that filmmaker's intent, which scares me.
Yeah.
I
don't know.
Yeah, it's hard.
So do you think then with all, it seems like the different deliverables are getting greater and greater. They're making more and more ways of showing this. So do you think it's just going to get worse and worse in not being able to maintain the look?
That's a great question. I really don't know where things are heading and what's going to be next, because firstly, I don't even know what trend line we're on, and then secondly, trends only go on for a little while, and then there's usually some kind of a discontinuous break. And like there's a story, I'm going to get the details wrong, but there's a story that's like that I always remember, that was like in the, I forget, the mid to late 1800s, they did a projection, and they said by 1950 there's going to be the streets of London are going to be 4 foot deep with horse shit. And of course cars came in, and then they didn't have any horse shit on the streets. So
that's pretty funny.
I might be getting the story wrong, but there's something like that. So
I don't know. It's a good story, even if you got it wrong. It's pretty apt.
Keep it, yeah.
So even if you actually know what the trend line is right now, which I don't, you don't know what sort of discontinuous change is going to happen, and because there's always like different phases where things get better and worse with that stuff. Because and this is kind of an interesting one, is we're talking about color spaces and stuff, but one of the when you're talking about the color spaces for monitors, that's even though that's got all its own problems, it gets even crazier with computers, where people are downloading a file, and then the computer's trying to guess what color space it's in and convert it to the color space for the screen. And then even if it's right about what it's in, what color space it's in, it might do the conversion wrong, or there's all of these variables. And one thing I'll say is, by no means is that all locked down and right, but it's actually that part is a lot better than it used to be. There used to be much more variation, like even if you were on, Mac versus PC, or, or even different apps and stuff. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that's all sorted out. It's not, it's still kind of a mess, but that part, actually, I think, is better than it used to be, in terms of it. Because it used to be, it could just look like absolutely anything. And now if somebody doesn't have their screen whacked out, even if it doesn't look perfect like it does to us, it's usually getting basically converted into the correct color space, live by the computer. So again, not perfect, but and not to say it's never whacked out, but it's gotten a lot better.
But say today, how many different deliverables do you have to work on, and how much time do you spend on the post process now?
A lot.
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I personally, besides the actual color grading and all that, I spend a lot of time setting up my, because I do all this stuff myself with my lookup tables and our post pipeline stuff, and and I spend a lot of time on that. Honestly, don't spend a ton of time. I'm not saying zero, but don't spend a ton of time. For example, doing the HDR specific version.
Really?
Because
wow.
Well, because so if let's put it this way, if it was straight HDR, we would just convert it perfectly and it would look the same. But we do have to do all those trims. Not. Yeah, it's the, it's the Dolby Vision version, which is what you have to do all those trims for, because basically because our movie we spent all this time to get it exactly how we wanted. It's not like, oh, I couldn't get the, it wasn't HDR, so I couldn't get that color I wanted. I'm not against a wall here. We made it exactly, spent a lot of time to get it exactly how we want. So you just want it to translate across. And because I'm not going more than 10 times the, middle gray with the brightness, and because I'm not making up those garish colors that are outside of the gamut for, for the narrower gamut color spaces, it can convert between every color space perfectly. And it literally would just be a conversion. It would just be the math and just do it and they're all the same. But the problem is that's not how it is. With Dolby Vision, what's happening is, it's almost ironic the way it works is we do it in so-called SDR. Doesn't matter what we're doing it in because it's just meters or feet. We're just making the colors we want, and then we're writing them down in the color space called Rec 1886. So we're not really, you could say you're doing it in a color space, but that's just, you're writing down, so that what you chose as color is written down and recorded in Rec 1886, which is the, or it could be, it could be DCI-P3, but whatever, it doesn't matter. It gets written down. Then we're converting that correctly to Rec 2100, which is the HDR color space. And actually, in the mastering, they actually use a hybrid color space for that, but it's going to eventually then get converted to Rec 2100, which is the standard HDR thing that all the consumers get. So that actually converts correctly to the HDR. And then what's not correct is then the Dolby, they have this thing called the CMU, which from the HDR automatically generates the SDR. So even though we started in so-called SDR, it's making an automated SDR from the HDR. So we converted correctly from SDR to HDR. Then they basically convert wrong from HDR back to SDR. So then that's why you have to do all the trims is basically because they're changing it when they convert it back, instead of keeping it the same, which again goes into that. This is what you're, people saying they want the two different versions. It's like this thing is converting it and making it look different. So we do have to do those trims. We do, but because we converted because we did two things. We did that first step correctly, right? We converted exactly right from SDR to HDR so that it would look exactly the same. And number two, we're not goosing it, because, and I know different, I don't want to limit somebody else because of my personal taste, but, my movies are like yours in that I don't want sparkly things to be 50 or 100 times brighter than middle gray. So between the fact that we did the first conversion correctly, which some people don't even do, and the fact that we're not goosing the highlights like that, we're not doing all the dazzly punch through the ceiling stuff, it's then that CMU version, that automated SDR version, is pretty good right out of the gate. And the colorist does have to do those trims you're talking about, which to me is very frustrating because we already did all this work, like just convert it correctly instead of converting it wrong. But given that it's what's happening, he does have to do it, but it's not a super heavy lift because of those two things of that we did the first conversion exactly right, and then we're not punching through the ceiling. If you do those other two things, if you do the first conversion wrong and or you have all of this stuff punching through the ceiling, then it's going to be a lot harder. You're going to have to be muscling those trims around a lot more because it's going to be a lot clunkier. And and it's funny because we did all of this delicate work, or we did so much work to make it look this way and use all these specific tools. We converted it right, then they convert it wrong, and they say, "Oh yeah, but you can grade it." But it's like it's like trying to do surgery
it's like
with
fighting it at that point.
Yeah, and it's like trying to do surgery with boxing gloves on because like the way the trims work. Like when we do the original grade, we can not only use every tool in the color corrector, we can literally write the math of our own tools to use. And we actually do all of that stuff. Whereas here, they're like, you've got two knobs that are just these overall knobs to put something back that we changed in a way that's, that's not, so you
it's
can't.
Very frustrating.
Yeah. So
you're so conversant with all these technical terms. I'm not. What's your advice to somebody, a young cinematographer that doesn't have your experience and knowledge of the digital workflows? What are the pitfalls
Oh yeah.
for
man,
post-production?
Right, and how to keep the image
for somebody
they want.
maintaining their work through the post-process.
Oh God, there are so many. I mean, to me,
you've been saying, but
yeah. I think the biggest thing is keep things simple. Like, if something sounds dazzling but it's more complicated, don't do it. Like, because it's hard enough to manage variables. No matter what, it's hard to manage the variables. So if you make more and more variables that you have to manage, it's more chances for pitfalls. And that goes for all kinds of things, including whether it's things like people make different LUTs per shot or per scene. I have one LUT for the whole movie. That's because that can be crazy. Of like, what if you lose track of them and you don't even know what's going on in the grade, and then you're going to spend your entire grading time instead of starting with something that's how you wanted it, and now you're just finessing it. You're trying to reinvent the wheel on every shot because you don't even know where it's supposed to start. Because it's hard enough to do the grade in the time if what you're doing is finessing. If you don't even have an image yet, and you're trying to figure out how to get the image to a starting place before you finesse it, you're wasting a lot of time there. And I think the other thing, there's a million sort of detail variables. So just in the big picture thing, is making sure you go to a post house that really knows what they're doing technically. There's a lot of people that say the word color science and stuff, or they say the word print emulation, but that doesn't mean they actually know what they're doing and how to do proper color space conversions and things like that. So I think it's, really making sure that the people know what they're doing, because the colorist does a very, very, very important job. But the thing is, there's also other things that you need from the post house, besides the colorist, in terms of the engineering and the pipeline stuff. And, like a lot of times, I know this happens where you even got DPs pulling an entire project into a boutique place because they want to work with a certain colorist. And, that's great. That's an artistic collaboration. But the problem is you're also changing facilities, and so,
exactly.
I would say, make sure the facility is right. And there's not, even though colorist is very, very important, and I'm by no means belittling that role in the image authorship, there's more than one great colorist, and it's not worth worth sacrificing.
Basically, in the post houses, they've got the color scientists, and if you've got a good team of color scientists, that's really great, because you never also know when an issue comes up that you weren't expecting. And if you have people that can really sit down and backtrack and find where the problem is, it's
absolutely
priceless.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, and going to a place that even does have, because not all the facilities have color scientists. Some of them don't have anybody on staff.
That's not good.
The boutique places, there's places that don't have anybody at all, or there's places that don't have anybody on staff. They just had somebody set something up for them. But I think I think also, to your point, I think a huge one too is once you have people like that, if you are at a good place, is talking to them when you start, not when you get into trouble. Because there's all there's these amazing people like like Josh Pines and Joseph Slomka and these the color scientists at various facilities. These people are super smart, and a lot of times nobody talks to them until something has gone wrong and they're trying to fix it. And it's like, go talk to them at the beginning so it doesn't go wrong.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, good advice.
Good. Well, this has been really good.
Yeah,
it's really interesting.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's such an
honor.
Yeah.
No, thank you. Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah. If you'd like to sponsor the Team Deakins podcast, let us know at pod@teamdeakins.com. Thanks for listening. If you want more information and further discussion, check out the forums at www.rogerdeakins.com. Becoming a member is free, and you can ask follow-up questions there. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast for more new questions and topics. Also, check us out on Instagram at team.deakins. See you next time.